welcome to Counting the Cost, Al Jazeera's business programme. I'm Lauren Taylor. Each week we'll bring you all the business and economic news from around the world. Coming up on the show, big banks bounce back, how the international markets are recovering. US subsidies stunting African growth. A Kenyan farmer tells his story.
There is a lot of money being forced into the system, but that's true of all over the world, Europe, America, everywhere.
Is China's government spending too much? And drilling for information, Brazil's oil giant under investigation. In the last few weeks, financial powerhouses like Goldman Sachs, HSBC and Barclays announced that they've started making big profits again. But does this mean that we're approaching the end of the economic downturn? Let's go over to London, where Sama Al-Shahat explains.
Yes, thank you. The financial crisis wreaked havoc on Wall Street last year, sending some of the world's biggest financial institutions into disarray. Bear Stearns collapsed, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy, and Merrill Lynch was forced into a merger with Bank of America. But in the last few weeks, there seems to be optimism that the worst could be over. Some banks have started making huge profits, and stock markets are also making a comeback with incredible gains. In fact, the highest seen in 10 months. So, does this indicate that we're finally making an economic recovery? Nazanin Moshiri has more.
A new dawn for the global economy? Well, here in the UK, it's not just the sun that's rising. The stock markets have rebounded, some banking profits are up, and manufacturing seems to be on the mend. The mood hasn't been this good in months.
Everyone thinks it's going to improve within maybe a year or so, I hope.
There's a lot more positivity around. There was a spell of doom and gloom.
The general mood that I get is that the worst is over. That's the belief, so I just hope we're not wrong.
It's a similar picture on Wall Street. Banks are doing better, manufacturing's on the brink of recovery, house prices are up for the first time in 3 years. But other markets jumping ahead of themselves.
A lot of countries, including America and Britain and so on, have got massive budget deficits. And as they seek to reduce these over the next year or two, that might trigger a second recession.
The current recession's already hitting jobs hard. 15 million Americans out of work. In a speech on Wednesday, President Obama admitted, although US businesses are back on their feet, they're still not hiring. In the UK, jobless numbers haven't been this bad in 14 years. Aaron Milhern's case is typical. A trained accounts assistant, he can't find the post he wants.
Because of obviously the recession and the companies at the moment are offering a lesser salary than previously what you would have been earning on that, because they know of how many people there are trying to compete for the same positions. The last job that I went to, I was on a short list of 2, and the other person got the job on the basis that he took the job for £2,000 less than what I was asking for. So it is quite cutthroat at the moment.
Even the world's fastest growing economy, China, admits it's got a jobs crisis. Millions of graduates and migrant workers are unemployed. The economy does seem to be recovering, though. Factories are producing and exporting more, but the impressive growth has come at a high price. Beijing has pumped more than $500 billion into the system, but that money is helping the world economy.
It's building new factories, new bridges, and to do that they need to import a lot of the raw materials as well as some of the equipment to carry out those projects. So China's growth is pulling goods produced out of the United States, out of Europe, and out of Japan.
What happens in China matters, but Asian growth may not be enough.
The financial markets may be doing well, but that's only a part of the economy. Recovery really depends on how confident people feel on the streets. And the reality isn't good. Banks aren't lending to businesses, wages are not going up, and people are being cautious about spending their money.
It's not clear whether real recovery is on its way, or this is just a false dawn. The outlook is still very uncertain. Nazanin Moshiri, Al Jazeera, London.
With me in the studio to discuss whether the banks really are on the road to recovery is Robert Ward, Director of Global Forecasting at the Economist Intelligence Unit. Robert, thank you so much for coming in. So tell me, is this banking boom sustainable?
Well, I think when you're thinking about the banking boom, you have to recognise that it is the product of a set of quite extraordinary circumstances. Money's free because interest rates are pretty much at zero.
This is the money coming from the government?
This is money coming from central banks, quantitative easing, from the Fed, the Bank of England and what have you. Lots of money around. A lot of bond issuance at the moment, so banks are underwriting that and getting income from that as well. So we do have special circumstances that are driving these very good bank results, and we have to welcome them in the sense that it does obviously help banks to recapitalise. In a sense, the free money is designed to drive stock market rallies, which is again designed to help banks recapitalise and also to help companies raise money. So this is all how it's supposed to be happening. But whether it's you should say that the banks are going to be making this sort of money forever, I think that's quite a different matter.
But shouldn't banks be lending to us, the people? But they don't seem to be doing that.
The banks are in a dilemma. On the one hand, they're getting a lot of them are getting taxpayers' money. So when that happens, of course, this means that lending decisions have to be political, because clearly, if taxpayers are giving money to banks, they want something in return. But the banks also have to preserve asset quality.
Do you think they should have made it conditional that the banks, in fact, lend more to small businesses?
Well, I think this was sort of implicit in the deal in many cases. But on the one hand, as we say, the banks have they needed taxpayers' money to survive, but they also have to look after their asset quality. So they are in this very difficult position. I think going forward, we've had these very good bank results, which is, as I said, welcome. But going forward, we do have very serious problems in the real economy, a lot of structural issues, and I think these will come home to roost in coming years. So I would have thought that results would not be so good in coming years as we've had recently.
For how long for can we get this incredible disconnect between what's going on in our world, in our, in Main Street, and what's going on in the financial sector or in Wall Street?
Well, as this is a product of these exceptional conditions, I think this will last maybe a few more quarters. But as we get further out, away from this, the emergency phase of this crisis, then the real economy will make itself felt more intensely.
But you can understand the anger of some people. I mean, some people are saying, look, the banks have taken so much money. Why aren't they giving something back to us? Why aren't they stopping foreclosing on housing or stopping raising interest rate on credit cards? I mean, these are pretty, fair questions.
Absolutely. But I think the bottom line is that economies need healthy banks. And if you have banks that are really driven by government fiat, government decisions, political decisions, that's when you also start to have problems. So I think we have to welcome the fact that, in a way, that the banks are trying to make themselves more financially secure.
The recovery, I mean, many people are getting excited about a possible recovery, but this is looking like a pretty stagnant recovery. Maybe we're just looking at 1% growth. I mean, that's not good enough to absorb the level of unemployment we're seeing.
Well, it's a game of two halves at the moment. We've had the free fall, the awful collapse that we saw end of last year, beginning of this year. We're now into what I would call the grind. Free fall is grim, but so is grind. The grind does mean we are on the way to a recovery and some sort of normalisation. But I think the key point is that the recovery will be slow. For many people, conditions will still feel recessionary, and this will take a very long time. So our core forecast assumes that really growth in many countries, excluding China, of course, which is driven by slightly different things, growth in many countries is below what it was in the years up to 2007 for the next sort of 5 or so years.
Robert Ward, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is on a 7-nation trip to Africa in an effort to boost trade and counter the influence of China on the continent. China has spent billions investing and buying up commodities it needs for its industry. According to the US Commerce Department, China was the largest exporter to the region, with a market share of almost 10% in 2007. The US share of exports fell to 5.3%. Clinton is paying a visit to Nigeria and Angola, which together supply about 12% of the United States oil imports. African nations are also keen to extend an agreement that allows the export of more than 6,400 products duty-free to the United States. But petroleum products currently account for 92% of US imports. It's not just oil, though. The US has set aside $20 billion to help African farmers to grow more food. But cotton farmers are struggling to make a living because subsidies are keeping the price of American cotton down, so Africa can't compete. One farmer told us how his standard of living has been plunging.
Jina langu mimi naitwa Peter Kimangu.
My name is Peter Kimangu. I came here with my wife in 1964. We have 10 children. I am a farmer in Makueni, Eastern Kenya. When the industry was vibrant in the 1980s, I managed to educate almost all my children. I reduced my cotton acreage because the industry was doing so badly. My children grew up and left, and my wife and I are too old to do farming. Cotton farmers have not benefited at all from this trade partnership between the US and Kenya. The rains are not an issue because cotton requires very little rain, much less than maize or beans. If things change and the cotton industry is revitalized, there can be so much potential. We need more education on cotton growing so that we can produce the best, internationally accepted cotton grade. We need to reduce the number of middlemen between us and the final destination of our product. And we also need more government subsidies. We want to get to a time when we can proudly pass over cotton farming to our children as a viable employment opportunity. If I had a ready market like Kenya's export processing zone, then I can even dedicate my entire farm to cotton growing.
Coming up after the break, probe into Petrobras. We talk to an expert who explains the implications.